And then once I stop, Lindsay, if you could start.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the September Executive Scrutiny Board meeting. Do you have any apologies?
No apologies, Chair, received.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper. Okay, I have no late items. Any declarations of interest? No, it's a none. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of August. Can I take those as a true and accurate reflection of that meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. On to item 5, forward plan. Any comments from any members on the forward planner at all?
Me, please.
Yes, Lucy, please come in.
There's a new item on which is looking, I think, in a very timely manner at the provision of school places in the city, and it's got down as a potential October 20 report to committee, and I just wondered whether it was likely to actually go in October, or whether it was actually just sort of that date was put in.
Okay, who can help us with that?
Hello, Chair. Can I come in? It's Andy Smith.
Yes, please, Andy. Thank you.
It may not be in October, but I know the team are attempting to move it through as quickly as possible. So it's not quite the answer that I can give you definitively, Councillor Kerr, but I know that the team are working to try and get it through as per the forward plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay,
thank you very much. If there's no more comments on the forward plan, we'll move on to the Executive Scrutiny Board Performance Plan. Now, as a number of you know who attended the special meeting to look at the work programme, we recognise that perhaps the chairs of the various boards needed to go away, talk to their members, think about the areas that they want to look at, and then come back to us. So hopefully the chairs are now starting to lead on that and have set some dates for their members to discuss this, and then come back to the Executive Scrutiny Board after that. If you need any help, chairs of scrutiny boards from officers, please let the officers know, and myself, and we'll try and give you whatever help that you need within reason. Any comments on that at all?
Chair, I could talk through the contents of the report if it would be helpful, just to set the context of the...
An aid memoir, just remind people. Yes, please, Alex. Thank you.
Okay, just bear with me while I open it up. Unfortunately, Heather Greening's not able to make it to this meeting, but we've worked with Heather and her team to develop the Executive Scrutiny Performance Forward Plan. Under normal circumstances, the Executive Scrutiny Board would agree a performance forward plan at the start of the municipal year, which would you would receive presentations and reports on matters of interest, in addition to the scrutiny of the Cabinet agenda, which obviously you're familiar with. However, given the slightly abortive start to this municipal year for obvious reasons, we've not yet agreed a performance forward plan for this year. Now, it became apparent from conversations with the chair of this committee and also chairs of other scrutiny review boards that there was a clear appetite from councillors to scrutinise the council's response to COVID-19. But also that needed to be done in a sort of structured and well managed way to avoid unnecessarily drawing resources away from those colleagues who were still actively involved in responding to the pandemic. So a meeting took place last month for a discussion between council representatives, the chair of this board, and the chairs of the other scrutiny review boards to consider how overview and scrutiny as a whole could look at the council's response to COVID-19. And what was agreed at that time, as Councillor Epton has already alluded to, was that the scrutiny review boards would go away and discuss with their members what particular elements of the council's response to COVID, those boards would look at as they relate to their remit in terms of reference, and that this board, the Executive Scrutiny Board, would develop a performance forward plan that mirrored the Council's recovery plan, which I understand is due to be considered by Cabinet in due course. I'm not entirely sure what month that is likely to come to Cabinet, but I'm sure the other colleagues on the call might be able to clarify that. So this report just sets that out and just makes clear to members of this board that the performance forward plan hasn't been forgotten about. Obviously, under normal circumstances, it would have already been agreed, but it was felt in the meeting with the chairs of the scrutiny boards that it was sensible for the performance forward plan to mirror the Council's recovery plan once that is published. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Alex. Are there any comments at all from chairs or others?
Myself, please.
Lucy, yeah, okay.
Thank you. I welcome that. I think a coordinated view from across different boards would be very helpful. But I think there's also it would be also opportune to review the way in which scrutiny works overall in the council, how our boards work, how the executive scrutiny works, and whether it's doing its function as effectively as it should, given that we have a minority control here. And I wondered whether that could be included in a forward plan and how to get it there.
Alex, any comments at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, if the board was minded to support that, we could obviously incorporate an overall review of how scrutiny operates within the forward plan, either for this board or potentially also the Audit and Accounts Committee. That is another area which looks at the council governance generally. Obviously, it's for members to decide whether they want to pursue a review of that nature.
Yeah, I'm keen to accommodate everybody's suggestions, but I'm also very keen to make sure we use scarce time, and that's scarce officer time and councillor time, as effectively as possible. What none of us want, I'm sure, is going around in circles or rediscovering the wheel. And so I think I think maybe a conversation, Lucy, outside with Alex or others about specifically what we want to aim at and what's it, and then for Alex to think about what that may involve and whether that's the best use of our time. Let's have that conversation, and if we can convince of that, we'll pursue it. But we have got our work cut out, I think, with the challenge to the scrutiny board's chairs as it is. Some very meaty pieces of work to do. But perhaps have that conversation outside with Alex, Lucy, and let's take it from there, can we?
Can I? Yeah, just to come back briefly, I think what we do probably needs to be informed by when we last had a review of scrutiny and the way it's working. And I think that was a long time ago. I think it's at least 5 years ago. And secondly, if we aren't doing scrutiny in the best way we should be, then the resources that we have for scrutiny will not be being used to their maximum effect. So it's important to do a review periodically to make sure that our limited resources are being used to their maximum.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what measurements we will use apart from subjective measurements. So again, I'll be advised by officers, Lucy, about whether we can do that effectively rather than subjectively. But we'll have that conversation outside this meeting because we've got a full agenda now, and then I'll ask Alex to we'll look at that and then we'll bring it back. Is that all right, Alex? Okay.
That's fine, Bree. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Right, now, Councillor Pegg asked, are we having a roll call? Shall we quickly go through a roll call? If we do that very, very quickly about who we are and our positions. Is that okay? Hello?
Chair, that's okay, yeah. Do you want me to just read through, just to start us off, do a roll call of the councillors unless they wish to introduce themselves individually?
Yeah, I think if you do it, Stephen, if you quickly rattle through the councillors who are here, and perhaps what chair they may be of, which scrutiny board, and then the officers, etc. Yeah. Well,
we've had the apologies from Councillor Cooper. All the other members are present, Chair. So we've got Councillor Kerr, Councillor Evans, Hudson, Hussain, Patterson, Paul Pegg, Testro, Willoughby, and yourself, Councillor Repton.
Thank you. Officers?
Give me a second, Chair, here. So we have officers present. I'll just quickly go through the names here. I've got Emily Phelan is here, Simon Riley is here, Matt Palmer, Andy Smith, Ian Fulliger, Kirsty McMillan. Councillor Ralston has now joined us, and we also have James Joyce.
Okay, and we have Lindsay as well. You're forgetting Lindsay.
Yes, of course, doing an important role in the background.
Yeah, the most important one of the lot.
YouTube this evening. And Alex Huff and myself. Have I forgotten anybody? Stephen Mason.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Okie dokie, right. Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. Are there any at all? So we'll look at item 7. You've got item 7 in front of you. You see the recommendations. Basically, it's to note responses from Council Cabinet. Are there any comments on that at all? Item 7.
There's noted, Chair.
Okay, if there's not, then we'll move on to the Council Cabinet per se. Thank you. Right. On the agenda, the first one was Adult Social Care, Your Life, Your Choice strategy. Is Andy going to take that, or Kirsty?
Kirsty, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Kirsty, over to you.
I've put my video on. Hopefully everyone can see me. Yes, I won't go through it in lots of detail. I assume most people have had a chance to look at it. But the report that's going to Cabinet is asking for approval of a revised adult social care strategy. The strategy was first written in 2015, and last autumn we carried out some consultation about some revisions that we wanted to make to the strategy, really about re-emphasising some of the important elements of it. I would say this report would have come probably much earlier in the year, but as you can imagine, the coronavirus pandemic, particularly impacting on adult social care, has delayed this significantly. And I also wouldn't mind pointing out that the consultation on the strategy and the strategy itself was obviously drafted before COVID. And actually, we still feel it's important to publish an updated strategy, even though it's not a requirement to have a strategy in terms of any statutory requirement, but it's a useful document in resetting or setting out what we're trying to achieve through the support we provide through adult social care. So obviously the big caveat is that it hasn't, it's not picking up the COVID issues. And I think Alex mentioned that later this year there will be a council recovery plan looking at the impact of COVID, and we'll make sure that that covers the adult social care elements. So just getting back to the strategy itself, then the consultation, the questionnaire that we used and the methods that we used are set out in the report, and you've got that in the appendix as well. Also given a summary of some of the findings from the consultation in the appendix 3. And you'll see, if you've read the report, that we used an online questionnaire. We made paper copies available, and we translated those into languages where we needed to. And there was also some discussions at the Carers Board, at our Disability Equality Hub and our Race Equality Hub. So we tried to make it as accessible as possible, and it was also sent out to our care providers. So really, unless you want me to go into the specific details, I would draw your attention probably to page 2 and 3, which sort of summarise the findings really. And the areas that I would just say we probably need to keep making sure that we explain ourselves clearly and that the language is understood, relate to the areas that appeared to be slightly less well supported in relation to our focus on supporting people's independence and preventing them needing more intense services, and also our sort of continual drive to help people use their own strengths and assets and their own skills and abilities. I think probably we just need to keep making sure that that language is understood. And actually, The COVID pandemic has been, it's been lots of things, but one of the things it's been fairly helpful for is really harnessing the support of local people and the voluntary and community sector. And actually, that is the core element within the adult social care strategy in Derby. And so when we do build up the council's recovery plan, we really need to, try and make that clearly understood as best as we can. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and just take any questions if there are any.
Doesn't time fly? I can remember doing the forward to this plan 5 years ago. Good God. Anyway, trip down memory lane. And I can remember also at that time we predicted that by 2030, over a quarter of the population of Derby were over 65, many with complex and costly health and social care needs. I guess that's the same and probably more so following on from COVID. So yeah, absolutely. But I've got three people who wish to come in. Fareed, first of all, Lucy, and then Stephen. Fareed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I won't go through all the achievements. I think there have been a number in terms of timely discharges, more people receiving habilitation, and people not being put in care homes if they had the potential to get further recovery on their condition. They were offered further rehabilitation, etc. But I'm going to focus on number of areas which require improvement on page 4. Kirsty has listed a number of areas which appear to be relatively weak, but they did form a core objective when the strategy was actually launched, that we will seek improvement in those areas in terms of services to carers, other recipients, and there are a number where the performance has actually gone backwards in terms of compared to previous years. So we need to put that right. And on page 10, Kirsty has listed, page 10 and 11, a number of initiatives which are listed there, which are to be undertaken to improve the situation. But they're spelled out in generalities, they're not really specific enough. I was just wondering whether we could ask Kirsty to bring a detailed paper when she's had time to work on the details. So if we are going to, for example, strengthen certain teams or produce more literature, then that needs to be spelled out more quickly. Say, I don't know how long it's going to take Kirsty to put all these arrangements in place, but say if she had 8 months in mind, then after 8 months, we need to see something which spells out clearly what actions have been taken to address them. Because although, what's listed on page 10 and 11 appear to be aspirational in terms of things which need tackling. But in terms of how they're going to be tackled, it needs to be a bit more specific so we can monitor the progress against those clearly set out objectives. Thank you.
Okay, it might be helpful, Kirsty. I don't know what you think. I'll take all three questions, then you can answer all three at once, Kirsty, rather than each one. Okay. Lucy, would you like to come in now, and then I'll take Stephen.
Thank you. One of the things I wanted to highlight was one of the factors which are less positive, which is those that people feel that 43%, 44% of respondents felt they had adequate social contact, which means that over half of people we are supporting who are receiving support in some way are feeling in one way or another lonely. And I think that is something that we need to be mindful of, because loneliness is a significant drain on people's energy in other ways, in terms of mental health and their physical willingness to do stuff. Now, yesterday, people might have seen on the television a little robot that was going into care homes and talking to people, and it was reporting some very positive research from that. Now, I don't think we've got little robots going into everybody's individual house, but I think we need to be very mindful over presumably the next 5 years for this document to be doing more. on this. There is a mention on page 10, the last bullet point, to it talks about technology and the way in which technology can assist. And I think this is one of the things that we need to be dealing with and offering to people, and maybe monitoring whether people who have got Google talking to them and they can ask Google to phone their sister, elderly sister, or whoever it might be, is something that is felt to be of value, and how we can bring that into improving people's lives. So I don't know whether it's something we should be more specific about or just for officers to keep in mind.
Okay.
There's two other points. One of them is on page 8, we're talking about the providers of care, and we had a paper on this last time, and I think the flexibility of providing care is obviously very important, but there's no mention here of the impact that casualising the provision of services has on the providers of those services. And again, I think it's something that a document like this we should be mindful of as a council, and I think to have had a mention of that, an acknowledgement of that within this document would be helpful. And finally, just before we publish it, can somebody just read through and get the apostrophes in the right places, because there are quite a lot of spare apostrophes on councils.
Thank you, Lucy. Before Kirsty comes back on Fareed's points and your points, Lucy, I'll invite Stephen. Stephen, would you like to come in with your comments, questions,
yes, thank you,
please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You can hear me all right.
Yes,
so paragraph 4.3 of this indicates that a number of amendments were suggested as a result of the consultation, okay? And paragraph 2.1 indicates the recommendation is to the Cabinet is to consider the consultation findings and approve the revised strategy. So what I'm keen to know is what's actually being presented to the Cabinet tomorrow and to us tonight actually the revised strategy. So Appendix 2, is that the original document or consultation thing that was sent out, or the revised strategy? And if it's not the revised strategy, where's that revised strategy as a whole documented, so as the Cabinet actually know what they're actually approving? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, Kirsty, do you want to take Fareed's comments and questions first, then Lucy, then Stephen, please?
Yeah, I can do. So I think what I was going to remind everybody about in relation to the valid points that have been made around, I think it's page 10 and thereabouts of the strategy, is that actually those figures are from nearly 18 months ago. So what happens is every year, although there won't be this happening this year for obvious reasons, but every year a survey is done, a sample survey of people who are currently getting social care support from local authorities, and we then are sort of compared with comparator authorities. So what's in the strategy is the latest that we've got, but sadly that relates back to the period 2018-19. So we haven't really, I suppose, that's not defending what those results were saying. I suppose it's just a reminder that it may well not be quite as up to date. And I think the other point that Fareed was saying about this being sort of some ambitions and aspirations, actually we are fairly down the line with the detail in response to a number of these, and where that detail is normally contained is within our business plan. So actually, you know, it depends how you want to do it, whether you want to do it within the adults and health scrutiny, but we do have quite a lot of detailed action plans already in train that we hope are addressing some of those areas from the 2018-19 survey where we didn't do as well as we've done in previous years. I suppose what we haven't got yet, however, is any feedback from individuals about improvement, and we're not going to get that for some time, because round about now we would probably be getting the results from last year, which would have been 2019-20, but of course a lot of that's been delayed because of COVID, and this year there isn't going to be a survey. So I suppose what we're trying to do in this strategy is look at the external information we've got to tell us how we're doing. So even though it's out of date, it is an indicator. And I think what we would hope is that we would see improvements this time round. We did do some specific work with carers in the intervening period, and actually we ran last year, it might have even been earlier this year, it's been such a long year, but we ran a kind of mini version of the survey just locally to work out whether, particularly some of the areas around people not having access to all the advice and information they need, whether that had improved. And we were seeing some improvements actually, but I won't be able to evidence that until we get the next round of survey results. But yes, just picking up Fareed's final point, really, a lot of the action plans around some of these areas are already in progress. They will have been derailed to a degree by COVID, but not all of them. And I suppose separately you might want to think about how that comes to scrutiny, I suppose, not necessarily through to Cabinet. I haven't had a request around our business plan directly from Cabinet as yet. And then I was just going to move on to Lucy's point, again a similar one about less than half of the respondents at that time, which is obviously a bit out of date, having less than the amount of social contact that they have. I think what that tells us to a degree is that adult social care over the years is very much focused on people with those substantial and critical needs. So actually a lot of the wider preventative support and sort of more universally available support is not necessarily what people access now through adult social care. A lot of that would have been historically provided through the voluntary sector and possibly even through services that the council funded. But obviously the world has changed significantly in the past decade, and actually we are only focusing in on those essential needs. So it's not that surprising that some of those wider support networks are not necessarily something that the council is organising and paying for, which is why the central premise of this strategy, and we need to just keep pushing this as much as we can, is about our drive around local area coordination, making the best use of people's networks that they've already got or networks that we know exist in the community, because actually adult social care is not going to be able to pay for some of that sort of softer social contact. Our intention is to connect people so that they, you know, can feel rooted in their communities. And again, one of the fantastic opportunities that COVID has given us is that has been something in Derby that has been fantastic with the voluntary sector and the community hub, particularly around the shielding groups, but obviously there's plenty of spin-offs that we can build on that. And the other thing I was going to pick up on what Lucy was saying was about technology, and sort of pushing the technology-enabled care agenda is something that has sadly been impacted by COVID. We were at the point of being able, and we wanted to this year, really sort of push forward on our CareLink service and use that as a platform to launch technology as a way of keeping in touch. We've not been able to do that within adult social care for obvious reasons. However, we have obviously shifted a lot of our contact remotely, and families and care providers have actually really embraced the use of technology during the pandemic. So we will be picking that back up in terms of what we can do as a council. But again, this is all building on that asset-based approach, isn't it, where people are actually making use of, I suppose, what the ordinary universal activities around keeping in contact, keeping independent, keeping well, that we can all benefit from, really. And then the final point, actually, no, I did make a note that there were a few rogue apostrophes, so thank you for pointing that out, Councillor Kerr. What we can do, this isn't the final version, we're going to have some case studies woven in, so actually we do have an opportunity to do a final proofread with colleagues in our design section. And just to answer the last point, yes, this is the revised strategy. There is an original strategy which was from 2015 that you would, if you had them side by side, see some differences. So yes, this is the revised version, subject to the printing or, you know, the typos that we need to resolve.
Okay, and there were Stephen's points, Kirsty.
Yes, I think that was that what he was wanting to know, whether this was the revised strategy or not, and whether Cabinet. I mean, I suppose you could decide whether you wanted us to make the original report available, the original strategy, tomorrow at Cabinet. We do have that.
So can I just ask a follow-on quickly, Chair? Does that include the amendments? Does that include the amendments from the consultation? Thank you.
It does, yeah.
Okay. Right, the final speaker on this will be Fareed, and then we'll move on to the next item. Fareed. Yeah, you need to. Your microphone's muted, mate.
Okay, yes. Okay. Just a quick point. First of all, people who are consulted over the new strategy would have been mostly people who are already in contact with the system, and mainly carers who are providing perhaps quite a substantial level of help and support to the person that they're caring for. So in that sense, the person that they're caring for would actually meet all the criteria. And part of our promise to carer has always been that we will actually be around to help and support them wherever help and support is needed. And if for whatever reason we appear not to be getting through to them, or they feel that that support is not being made available as and when required by them, then I think we need to address that. Secondly, if I could just say quickly about the action plan. The idea behind action plan coming before either this board or Health and Adult Care Board is for us to look at what you're proposing to do and then make an assessment whether the way you're trying to address them, the plans have the potential to address the issues that you're trying to address, and that's our job as councillors. To take a view of whether what you're proposing is robust enough to address the issues which have been identified. So that was the idea behind it, really.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. I'll leave you to decide how best to do that then. I suppose just to reassure you, the carers' issues, were definitely loud and clear from the information we had 18 months or so ago, and a lot of work has been ongoing directly with carers. And actually, if you do have a look at the detailed plans behind the strategy and behind really how we organise ourselves, you would see that there is some specific work we've been doing with carers.
Okay. So we'll perhaps have to consider how we might take this forward on a future occasion, I think, on that one. Now, we've got from Lucy a recommendation. Kirsty, can you see what Lucy's typed? So, are you able to incorporate that?
What I'm through you, Chair. What I'm recommending is that we should be specific in the document regarding the reference of use of technology in the last bullet point on what is currently page 10. And specifically including the use of assistant communication devices. I hope that's a reasonably generic
and that's what I'm
term. I'm not sure if that's an official term, but if people think there's a better term than when you shout, "Hey Google" or something.
Lucy.
For which early research is indicating that it can reduce loneliness for some older people.
Yeah, Lucy, that's why I wanted to ask Kirsty. Kirsty, could you incorporate that, please?
I can definitely incorporate it. I don't know whether that's the latest terminology or not, but I could talk to our director of IT because he'll probably know. But I think I understand what you're meaning. It's about making sure that particular intervention is referenced because it can help reduce older people in terms of isolation.
Great, that's smashing. Thank you very much for that.
Before you go on,
we ought to vote on it as well, Chair.
I only verbalised it. I didn't actually make a written recommendation, but the idea is for Kirsty to bring the paper to either Health and Adult Care Board or here. I'm quite happy if you take it to the Adult Health Care Board. I just want to have an oversight along with my colleagues just to see that what you're proposing is robust enough. And that be included.
Is that okay, Kirsty, or what do you think?
I think if it sounds like I might have to ask Alex. Do you want to make that as a recommendation, Councillor Hussain? I mean, the idea of it going to the Health Scrutiny Board is absolutely fine by me.
Yeah. Fareed, Alex, in terms of the process for this, does Fareed need to type something out to make a recommendation, or can you take it on board verbally?
I think this is something for my colleague Stephen to deal with, as he's officially the Democratic Services Officer in this meeting. So I'll hand over to him.
So if I think we need to just. There are certain points that go to recommendations, and then we can go to a vote on. And there are certain action points that can be taken away, so and they can be dealt with outside of the meeting. But so if we take Councillor Kerr's recommendation first of all, I think is that something that we want to vote on as members of the committee?
Yes, I was going to take that, but Fareed interjected, and I thought we'll deal with that now. Then I'll go to the vote on both. So.
Absolutely,
so
Chair.
In terms of recommendations, Stephen, do you need that? Can you take it verbally, or do you need it in writing?
I can read it out now quickly, Chair, if you'd like me to.
Much. Yeah, go on then.
So it's to recommend to Council Cabinet that references to the use of technology in the last bullet point on page 10 of the report specifically includes the use of assistant communication devices for which early research is indicating that it can reduce loneliness for some older people.
That's fine. I was on about Fareed's, but okay. Okay, to be helpful, is everybody in favour of that? So let me say, does anybody object to that recommendation? Please shout out now if you do. No. So I'm assuming that you're all in favour of it. Okay.
So that can go forward then as a recommendation to Cabinet. And the second one, Councillor Kerr's typed in something here.
Recommendation for further paper to be provided on the proposed plans for the delivery of this vision. Are we all in favour of that? Okay.
Chair, is Fareed happy with that first? Because it's his, not mine.
Are you happy with that, Fareed? I think it encapsulates what you'd like. Does it?
Yeah, that sounds okay. Fine, that's fine.
And it's to go. You're proposing then, Councillor Hussain, for that to go to your board.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we all in favour of that? Can you shout out if you object, please? No, I'm getting no objection, so I'm taking that you're in favour. Okay, Stephen, we've got the drift on that.
Thank you, Chair.
Now, in terms of Andy and Kirsty, love to have you for the rest of the meeting, but I know you've got some private lives to lead, so if you wish to leave, please do so.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Andy. Right, moving on to item 9, allocations policy 2020-2025. Who's taking us through this, Alex? Sorry, Stephen. Item 9.
I believe that'll be me, Chair, James Joyce.
James, okay, James, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, I've had some very positive comments passed through to me today with regards to the format of the allocations policy from Councillor Kerr, which I've been frantically working on to make those amendments. So thank you very much for that. A lot of them were grammatical, which has helped me out hugely. So those are going to be incorporated and have mainly been incorporated. And there are a couple of key other bits as well, which I'll touch on as I go through the presentation of the report. Each local authority, so the purpose of an allocations policy, as I'm sure you're aware, each local authority is required to have an allocation scheme for determining the priorities for the allocation of social housing. And the allocation policy, the current one, was approved in March 2013, and it does require updating to reflect subsequent legislation changes and to respond to the local authority's current emerging strategic priorities. The recommendation is for this to be approved when it goes to Cabinet tomorrow. The reason for it is to ensure the local authority makes best use of its current social housing stock. And some supporting information that I'll touch on how the policy is being created is that the way the local authorities allocates empty properties is largely governed by various acts of Parliament and also the outcome of some cases that go through the courts, and the council takes also account of government guidance concerning the allocations from time to time when that's published. A main factor is Part 6 of the Housing Act 1996 as amended, and that governs the local authority for allocations of the housing stock in England, and has been subsequently amended at previous times with effects of the 31st of January 2003, and also by the Homeless Reduction Act 2002, the Localism Act 2011, and more recently the Homeless Reduction Act of 2017. This has meant lots of amendments that have taken place to the existing policy, and this is a key part of why we need to address and rewrite. The Localism Act gives us the authorities greater power to decide on which categories of person that we will accommodate and allocate to. And the Homeless Reduction Act 2017 has placed additional duties on the local authorities to prevent and relieve homelessness wherever possible and practical. And this refreshed allocations policy gives the local authority the ability to assist with homelessness households under these new duties. The allocations policy really does spell out lots of criteria, and it talks about how the council, through Home Finder landlords, allocate social housing properties across the city. It gives guidance on how to select a person to be a secure introductory tenant of the council, to nominate people to be tenants of housing accommodation, and to nominate assured tenancies and housing accommodation held by private registered landlords. The allocations policy also identifies a large number of other items, such as it identifies people with the greatest housing need and prioritises the limited stock that we have. It prevents people from becoming statutory homeless. It makes best use of our housing stock and suggests other options available to people who are in seeking advice from housing options. It ensures that the council's legal duties are met. And there are lots and lots of other bits that I'm sure that you've all read through this previously. Some of the key bits I wanted to touch on for you is the previous allocations policy operated with a 2 bands system, and that was an emergency band and a general needs band. And this revised allocation policy is introducing a 3rd band, which is changing the priorities within each band to represent the financial pressures upon the local authority at present. So we will have 3 bands, and the highest band that you could be popped into would be the corporate needs band, which will be addressing some key priorities for the city, such as foster carers and adopters, care leavers, releasing larger properties, move on from specialist supported housing, and those people with severe medical. And those last 2 really are key, where it's trying to avoid people moving into other services that are very costly. Priority needs band is the 2nd band, and that will be addressing people who are homeless or threatened with homelessness and armed forces. And the 3rd band is the general needs band, and this will be addressing applicants identified with housing needs under occupying by 1 bed space, for example, or the need to move to remain in employment or education. The allocations bands to each one of those, the proportion, how we the quotas can be fluctuated as and when we need to, giving us that flexibility to respond to pressures within the city. Lots of public consultation has taken place and stakeholder involvement to get us to where we are now, reviewing the existing allocations policy to understand. Lots of sessions took place with the voluntary sector and other partners across the city who support citizens of Derby in their housing solutions. The public consultation took place. We had 120 citizens who responded to that, and that gave us some really good insight into where we were with the policy, and those have been incorporated in. Some other options, if we were not to do the new allocations policy, the local authority is required to have an allocation scheme, and the current scheme is outdated and does need updating though, but the local authority could choose to retain just the existing 2 bands for rehousing, which was the emergency and general needs. And this would continue to meet the statutory requirements upon the council, but it wouldn't offer the greater opportunity for us to target the use of the social housing to the current and emerging needs that are the greatest. Financial issues, that there is no impact there with that. Other significant items that to talk about is that the allocations policy is to provide a framework covering our actions in relation to the allocations within Derby and how we prioritise available social housing from the Home Finder partners to meet the needs of those requiring housing. And it supports the council's 2019-2023 themes of the city, which is to be health and happiness, and the council's focused on getting things done right. And it's also poignant to point out the allocations policy is also aligned and supportive of the council's adopted housing strategy 2020-2030, and in particular priority 1 of that strategy, which relates to making best use of housing stock.
Thank you, James. I've got a couple of people who'd like to raise some questions. Lucy first of all, then Stephen. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you, James, for that very thorough introduction. It's appreciated. And thanks for taking on board some of the things I talked to Claire about this afternoon.
Yep.
I appreciate it as well. I wanted to raise one of those specifically, which comes under 7.4, which is other local connection circumstances, because it's not something which I bottomed with Claire. And you may have views, and others may have too. Now, these circumstances that are listed in a large number of bullet points there, includes young people who are leaving the care of the council.
Yeah.
But what it doesn't include is young people who are living in Derby under the care of a different council. And I wondered, I don't know whether, for me, they are an important part of our community, and I don't know whether they get covered by Children's Act or not, but I feel that we ought to be giving them that same sort of priority. And if other people feel the same, then I think we should include that as a bullet point under 7.4. So I'd be interested to know what other members think on that. That's the first one. The second relates to paragraph 12.4, if anyone wanting to search it out. And this is the priority needs band. And it's just a clarity here. The fifth bullet point, which I've just got to locate, talks about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It talks about the armed forces, and I think this may be covered nationally in national legislation, but it may not be clear here. In that it says, is it people who have served in the armed forces in the last 5 years, and or include, I'm sorry, is it just the bereaved spouse of somebody who was in the armed forces for the last 5 years, or also somebody who has served in the last 5 years? And
Yes,
it's just the
right.
clarity. It's just, so if you left the armed services 6 years ago, you don't get any preferential treatment.
Okay, James, before you come back,
so it was clarity on that one. Now, my final point is a little bit further down, which is, again, people living in two bullet points further, people living in unsatisfactory housing conditions or in sanitary conditions. And point E there has sharing facilities, sharing a living room, kitchen, bathroom, WC with people who are not family and not moving with you. That sounds to me like a house in multiple occupation. And we are, in planning, we are allowing, because we can't otherwise do so, a significant number of houses in multiple occupation to be provided. And I know that there are also people who would otherwise be homeless who are being allocated into houses in multiple occupation, because otherwise they would be completely homeless. So I don't know how that point E fits with other things within our wider council policy. And I'd just like to have some comment and advice on that. And a final point is that
this is the final point of the three.
Yeah,
is this the fourth?
I'm sorry, this is the fourth point, and it's just a comment to say that it would have been nice to have had a summary of some of the consultation responses as part of the paper, but we're not seeing that now. But
James, before you come back, can you take Stephen first of all, and then come back to both of them, please?
Will do, yeah.
Stephen, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you very much. So if we go to, again, section 12.4, and it talks, one of the bullet points down there, it talks about you or a member of your household are at serious risk of harm in your present home. And it talks, one of the examples is serious sort of antisocial behaviour or harassment. I'd just like to unpack that a bit more about how much sort of antisocial behaviour is considered in this policy as for relocating somebody from a council home, because certainly a lot of the casework that I have around council homes has been people experiencing antisocial behaviour and desperate to, and you know, it can be a very debilitating thing to experience antisocial behaviour for these people, and they're desperate to move out of their properties. But it does on a lot of occasions seems that other than making sure they've got all the right needs have been assessed, that there's actually little that I as a councillor can do to help get them moved out of that desperate situation that they're in. So I'd like some more clarity around how that sort of antisocial behaviour is considered in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. James, do you want to come back on Lucy's points and then Stephen's, please?
Yep. First of all, yes, I think the 7.4 around young people. I think you did get your message over quite clear to Claire, I believe, Councillor Claire, around the those young people who have been in care, and is that the right thing with the local connection? Because we've actually incorporated that and felt that that was a really valid point that you'd raised. And those people who have got corporate parent responsibility, if you hadn't pointed that out, I believe that we would have missed something there, and those young people would have been disadvantaged. Because the local connection, if you have a parent within the city, you are enabled to get that need awarded to you, and that's something we've looked at, and we are going to hopefully, I've incorporated it, and if you guys all agree with that, then it will go forward as part of the allocations policy. The clarity on the armed forces, I believe Matt, who's with us, he's pretty switched on to that, and I don't know if you can interject with that, Matt, but I believe that it is that 5-year band and area, and that it is for served and bereaved.
It is. It's 5 years. That if you've served in the armed forces for 5 years or the reserve forces for 5 years, that that you would meet that criteria within that bullet point. That said, if somebody was 5 years and 1 day, we wouldn't say no. I think there's a degree and an element of common sense to be applied, but there needs to be a cut-off and a definition in the line. I left the armed forces in 1996, and I think I'm out of time for that now, sadly. So all it is just drawing a line as to what that point is, but having some discretion with it.
Okay, yeah. Sharing facilities, that's a really good point raised there.
Just before I go on to that, it's great that Lucy has raised this issue about children in care, but do you share this document with our social care colleagues? Because I think that if not, we ought to be doing, so they can use their professional judgment to make these comments.
Chair, if I can come in there, yeah, and I think that there's two bits within the Children Act, the 2 points that are poignant on within there for me, that everything should be done with the best interest of the child, and the wishes and feelings of the child should be taken into consideration. And I think that within that context, that if the corporate parent was outside of the city, applying those two factors, that yes, we would include those, because it's it's humane and it's right and proper to do so.
So are you happy with the recommendation that Lucy is suggesting on the screen? If you can read it, can you read the recommendation? Are you happy with that?
Shall I read it out? That I recommend that young people who were living in Derby under the care of another local authority should be given priority in terms of having a local connection as they leave care.
I agree with that.
Yeah, we agree with that. Yeah,
we agree with that. Okay.
Yes,
absolutely.
Okay. We'll incorporate that. Thank you very much. Okay. Have you any more points that Lucy raised that you want to comment on?
It was the sharing facilities, wasn't it? I think the one of the ones we talk about, and the sharing facilities one is quite a difficult one, because we often get applicants coming through onto Home Finder who try to use the sharing facilities need as an additional need when they're actually sharing facilities within their own house with what was mum and dad. So they've turned 18, they're no longer a child in the house, and they are ready for rehousing and believe that they are classed as sharing facilities. This one, what this is more about, is those people who are sofa surfing and sharing facilities elsewhere, which is not in the parental home. But I do take on board your comments around shared housing, councillor, as
that bullet point, people living in unsatisfactory housing conditions or unsanitary conditions, that is a reasonable preference group that must be included. And so the bullet points below are they're lifted, from the government guidance, as opposed to things that we've just thought they would qualify for that. If that helps.
The final point to answer there with Councillor Kerr was the summary of the feedback. So yeah, apologies for that. I could have incorporated some of that, and that's something I'll take forward for next time.
Thanks very much. Okay, Stephen's
Stevens, yeah, the serious ASB one. The serious ASB need is a really difficult one for us to manage, and we do lots of investigation work. So when a customer does complete the application form and identify to us that they are suffering ASB, particularly it's a little bit easier for us if they're currently a tenant of ours, because we can do that research very quickly, and we involve our antisocial behaviour team, and they will support that customer. So the first thing is we offer them support, to make sure that they're getting everything that they need to try and resolve the antisocial behaviour issues. When it's somebody that's not a tenant of Derby Homes, Derby City Council, it's a little bit more difficult, and we do have to have some evidence there. And the ASB need can be awarded with something as simple as a crime reference number. So if the customer has reported the antisocial behaviour to the police and they've recorded it, that crime reference number is enough for us to be able to award that need.
Okay, are you happy with that, Stephen, or do you want to come back in?
Yeah, so that, just turn my mic on again. So that is a recognised need then. So it is an antisocial behaviour is a recognised need.
James is nodding, Stephen, yeah.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it is right. Brilliant.
Somebody
That's
who's
right,
suffering, because you're absolutely right. It's detrimental to their health and well-being. Yes.
Great.
So it is a need that they will get considered. Brilliant. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Can I just raise one more thing, Chair? So also Councillor Kerr raised with us today around the introduction of the allocations policy, where it says that we don't discriminate against certain categories of people, and one of those categories in there was we referenced to that we don't discriminate against people of age, and Councillor has pointed out that we sort of contradict ourselves later on in the allocations policy because you have to be 18 to apply, and also we specifically point out in the allocations policy that there are certain types of properties that you have to be over 60 to qualify to even apply for. So I just want to say that we've not overlooked that, and what we are doing, we're currently seeking urgent legal advice from our legal team to make sure that what we do write in there is correct, and if we need to make any amendments to that phrasing at the beginning, then we will do that before it goes to Cabinet tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, if there's no more comments on item 9, I want to thank James and Matt for that, and we'll move on to item 10, which is
Chair, recommendations from this one, please.
Sorry?
We've got recommendations to consider from this one.
Right, okay. So we've got the recommendation that young people who were living in Derby under the care of the local authority should be given in terms of having a local connection as they leave care. I think we've accepted that, but we need to vote on that, I guess, Stephen, don't we?
Well, I'll just quickly read it out, then Chair, and then if no one's against it, then we can take it that it's unanimous to recommend Council Cabinet that the policy clarifies the difference between someone sharing facilities within a recognised house in multiple occupation and someone staying with friends on an ad hoc basis when assessing them for a priority need band.
When assessing them, it should be them. THEM, Stephen, okay. Them for a priority, but yeah, okay. So is anybody that objects to that? If not, I am assuming that you're all in favour of that. The previous recommendation we're okay with as well, that I went through, unless I have any objections to it. And that's the recommendation that young people who were living in Derby under the care of another local authority should be given priority in terms of having a local connection as they leave care. We're all happy, we're in favour of that, unless I hear otherwise. Okay, so that's those two. And then finally, Lucy's recommended that it is clarified whether age is or is not a fairness factor. Okay, Matt and James are okay with that. Are we all okay with that? And again, unless I hear to the contrary, I'm going to assume that we're all okay with it. Okay, that has been passed as a recommendation. Thank you, James. Thank you, Matt. And let's move on to item 10.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Compulsory acquisition of empty homes. Who's taken us through that? Is that you, Matt?
No, that's me, Chair. Ian Fulliger.
Sorry, Ian. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Members, you'll be quite familiar with this report. You'll have seen a number of these come up before, and we typically take 2 to 3 of these CPO reports up in any one year. The council very much regards an empty home as a wasted resource, and that's particularly acute at the moment, both nationally and locally. Members will be aware that we take lots of effort to get empty properties back into use. We provide lots of advice and support for the owners of empty properties to enable them to bring their properties back into use. We have discounted rates with the local auction house if one route to get the property back into use is to sell it. And we also offer interest-free loans as well to help them find the financing often necessary to bring homes back into use. But it's really important that if all of that help and support fails, that we have teeth or a stick, so that if all of that fails, we can actually take the step of CPO in these empty homes and bringing them back into use. And in the majority of cases, when we CPO properties now, those properties are refurbished and come into council's use, so they add to the council's affordable housing stock. On rare occasions, they're just not appropriate for council use, and we will then sell them through an auction, and there'll be certain conditions attached to that sale to ensure that they're brought back into use within a timely manner and to certain standards. In this particular case, there's 5 properties that we're seeking authorisation to make a compulsory purchase order on. All of those 5 properties will have been empty for at least 3 years. 1 or 2 of them have been empty for significantly longer than that. They all will have attracted complaints from neighbours. The owners will all have failed to sufficiently engage with our officers as we try to support them to bring them back into use. And they've all failed to demonstrate that they are bringing these properties back into use in a timely manner. So hence we are now going to Cabinet tomorrow night asking for a CPO for each of those 5. From our previous experience, probably only 2, maybe 3 of them will actually result in a CPO, because often the threat of having a Cabinet resolution to CPO the property is enough of a push in itself to get the owners to bring the properties back into use themselves. Members will be aware that the actual addresses of these properties aren't made public at this stage, but they are available in your pink papers at the back of the Cabinet report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Right, Lucy and Stephen. Lucy?
If only we still had pink papers. They're just on the screen.
Your virtual pink papers, yes.
My virtual pink papers on white paper. Could I just, I want to put forward a recommendation to thank the Empty Home team for the work they're doing, because I think it's really important. I'd love you to be doing more, so it's to expand this activity if possible. We have a desperate shortage of homes in the city, and everyone that's standing empty is an opportunity being missed, and there is still quite a lot more for your team to work on, so all power to your elbow.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Stephen?
Yeah, sorry. Right, thanks, Chair. Yes, I've got a question now. I'm just sort of concerned, obviously, with spending out money on buying these homes. What is the risk to the council of compulsory purchase of these homes? So is there a risk of any loss to the council if it doesn't recoup back the cost of purchase from any resale that you mentioned, obviously, at various points in the paper?
There is a risk, if I may, Chair. It's fairly small. It's I think the paper talks in the order of 3 to 5 grand potentially per property. But as the report says, the vast majority of these properties will move into the housing revenue account, so they will become council homes, and therefore, in all of those cases, we can ensure that the housing revenue account is covering the council's, if you like, the general fund costs of running this service. So in the vast majority of cases that there won't be a loss. There are a couple of scenarios when we might incur losses. One of those, as I was saying earlier, if we did decide to sell a property at auction, obviously we can't guarantee what the auction price would be, and the owner can appeal to the Lands Tribunal, and there is a chance that we would lose that appeal, and we might have to pay out the difference between the value that was achieved at auction and the value that that was determined. However, saying that, I've been doing empty properties for 6-7 years, and that has never occurred. So the losses, or the chances of losses, are pretty small here.
Okay, thanks, John. Before I take anybody else, we've got the recommendation to thank the Empty Homes team for the work that they're doing and to expand this activity if possible. I wouldn't have thought there's anybody who would object to that, but please shout out if you do object to it. No? Okay, we'll take that as a recommendation that's been accepted. John Evans, would you like to come in and yeah, John, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, it's good work this. It's like reiterating what Lucy stated earlier. It's very good to see empty homes put back into service. In fact, it's a crying shame that we have so many empty homes. And my question really is, can you give me a figure or a rough figure on how many empty homes you have identified across the city that aren't yet at the stage of compulsory purchase orders or further action? Thank you.
John, Ian, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. We have, I have to be quite vague because it's been a while since I've looked. We have probably a couple of hundred that are on our radar, and they progressively either move off the list when the owners actually do take action, or indeed when they get to the very top of here and we end up with a CPO. So we're monitoring that sort of figure. You'll have seen in the report, in total, there's about 1,000 or so what is charged as long-term empty properties. Those are empty properties that have been empty for more than 6 months. However, the vast majority of those are just tied up in sort of, if I can put it, legal bureaucracy, sort of in probate and things like that when people have passed away, and it just takes time. So we don't spend our resource pushing those types of properties because they will get resolved, and to be honest, there isn't a lot we can do when they're tied up in the law in that way.
Thank you very much, Ian. Right, okay, Lucy made a comment, should that be empty homes, Ian?
I'm sorry, I didn't see the comment when it came up on the screen.
Yeah.
Don't worry, Martin.
It
was just checking my wording, but you read it round right.
That's fair enough. Okay, right. If there's no more comments on that, thank you very much, Ian. And the recommendation is as printed. Moving on to item 11, and that's
we couldn't see your face, Councillor Upton. It's Emily. We can't see your face in your current picture. You seem to have stood up and chopped your head off.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Let me sort it out. Okay, right. Item 11.
That's better.
Right. Now, before Simon, do you want to present this?
Yes, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So, thank you, Chair. This is the Q1 monitoring report, and also giving a bit of an indication of the context that next year's medium-term financial plan for the next 3 years will be set against. And maybe just an introduction, members of the scrutiny panel will remember I brought a report on COVID which talked about some of the atypical expenditure we were having to spend in respect of responding to COVID, but I also highlighted that the impact of COVID was going to have an impact on demand for services, income levels, and also going for more than 1 year. So this, by its very nature, is quite a comprehensive report, which details a number of financial sort of stories and pictures that the report hopefully answers in sequence. So maybe just to take you through the report and its headlines. The council is forecasting on a revenue budget a overspend of 8.330 million at the end of Q1. You'll notice that the majority of that is in respect of children's social care, and we have in children's social care not only an increase in looked after children, which is being experienced across many different councils, but also, as we've discussed in this committee previously, issues with sufficiency in terms of being able to meet that demand within the city and having to place children in independent foster care out of the city or residential placements. And in the report in section 4.2.10, you can see quite a stark table which shows an increase in the number of external placements that we've had to make in response to the demand at the moment, from 329 budgeted placements up to 430. I think it's important to state, and Andy Smith might come in response to any questions, that because of COVID, there are also some children who are within the system who would have normally exited care, but have not had the opportunity, or the arrangements have not been in place for children to exit care. So we're having more people being registered as looked after children than people, in a sense, coming out of the looked after children system. So it is, if you want to call it, pretty much a perfect storm of increased demand, a lack of sufficiency, and also if the impact of COVID impacting on the looked after children cohort. But hopefully the report details not only the context of increased demand, but some of the initiatives that we are implementing to try and, in a sense, readdress that balance, because financial sustainability of the council is dependent on being able to manage the impact of children's social care, adult social care, and other aspects. Probably the context of this is that outside of that, obviously, we're showing some small overspends on communities in place and a small underspend on corporate resources, which means that the rest of the council's budget is forecast to be delivering pretty much as planned to the budget that was approved back in February. In the report, I've detailed in the appendix the split of the COVID expenditure, and we're currently forecasting the potential for 28 million of COVID expenditure, which the government has given us just short of 17 million so far to meet the costs. But they have indicated that there's an income guarantee scheme that is coming in, and also support for collection fund losses. So we are still lobbying for additional money. But if that is not to be forthcoming, then we would have to look at reserves to meet that. But I think if we've got to be honest, we have to see what the impact is of the second half of the year, the impact of any second wave, the impact on demand from, in a sense, services reopening or services having to be constrained because of COVID. So the revenue budget is a challenge at the moment, and I've again mentioned to many members that this is a challenge being faced by every council, not just Derby. The relative statistics that show that we are actually managing this unprecedented impact on our finances a lot better than other councils, and the impact is lower, but it still remains a local challenge for us to balance a budget both this year and in future years. The report details the capital budget, which is a spend of just shy of 11 million against a programme and approved budget of 183 million. There are certain programmes in there like schools and some of the HRA properties, which would always be scheduled for the end of the year, but we need to keep our eye and focus on delivering our capital programme in line with what we set down back in February. So the spend at the moment is relatively low and probably slightly lower than the profiled spend that we would expect. For reserves, again, the report has a sort of a schedule of reserves which show that if we do have an overspend in this year as a result of the demand pressures and or COVID, that will place a strain on our reserves position, which can be met within year, but will impact on the MTFP going forward. The dedicated schools grant shows continued pressures on the high needs block, which again is an issue being faced across by other council, but I think members, especially of the Children's Scrutiny panel, will know that we're working very well with the schools to reconfigure, reprioritise and work in partnership with parents and schools for designing different responses and different partnerships to address the high needs block. The collection fund is where we collect the business rates and council tax. Income levels and recovery means that level of recovery is likely to be down this year, and we have to work out what the impact of that is in setting the budget for next year and in future years. And again, the government might give us some support in respect of that. And then the housing revenue account again is showing a planned use of reserves of just shy of £5 million. So when you take that into account, the report tries to paint a honest picture of the financial position as we see it at the moment, but also to highlight to all members that the interplay of COVID and the impact on our spending plans that we set in February is complex and is subject to many different influences and scenario planning. So it is likely the figures will change over the course of this year. Some things will get better, potentially some figures may get worse, and we will try and report that as quickly and as transparently as possible. So the last bit of the report is talking about the medium-term financial plan, and you can see there's a table in there which shows a potential budget gap next year. And it's primarily made up of the potential scarring impact of COVID, the demand pressures we're experiencing in social care, and some of the normal, if you can call it, refresh of budgets that we would expect. To tackle a budget gap of the size mentioned, we need to be looking to constrain demand where possible, to control costs, to generate income, and to bounce back as a city in terms of some of the income generation that we have been hit with in terms of it disappearing or being scaled back this year. So the proposal is that the Cabinet will be working on proposals in respect of a budget alongside waiting for the comprehensive spending review in November, and that we will be issuing a budget for consultation probably a month or 6 weeks later than in previous years, because I think to go out with a budget that we do not know the balance between government funding and our own response might actually create confusion within the residents of Derby, and therefore we will be looking to start the consultation in December once the comprehensive spending review is known. So on that basis, Chair, this report has many different tables, many different explanations, and I'm quite happy to take questions from members as they bring them up.
Right, I've got 4 questions, but I want to ask a question of the Cabinet member, Councillor Ralston, first of all. At a shadow Cabinet briefing, we were quite shocked when it was indicated to us that the City Council is facing a black hole of between 10 million and 20 million in its budget. Now, if that is the case, and this was made, made to us quite seriously at our shadow Cabinet meeting last week, how will that black hole be met? It can be met in 3 ways. There's only 3 ways, it seems: of a referendum and a 15% increase in the council tax base, swinging cuts on the statutory services, as 75% of all our spending goes on childcare and adult care, or a massive cash injection to our base budget by government? Which is it, Councillor Olsen?
I think you'll find it's probably a combination of all three, Martin. If I'm honest, we have to be realistic in what we're going to be progressing over the next 12 to 18 2 years. COVID is going to have a massive impact on the city, and we just have to face the challenges as we come up against them. There is a reserve element that will have to be used during this part of the COVID situation. So there's a fourth element there, Martin. But I agree there will be savings to be made across the council, hopefully not on the ground services, but we have to be realistic in what we are faced with. In reality, we will look to raise the council tax as we have done last year. But in terms of what we expect from government, I'm hopeful, and we've been pushing with both the government and the RMPs, but also through your SIPFA and LGA, and I know I myself have completed a number of relative questionnaires and things that have been asked of us. So I think it will be a combination of all, but I'm hopeful that we can make in-house savings that are not impactful on the ground.
Thank you for your honesty, Nicola. Moving on to Stephen, Lucy, then Paul. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so it obviously makes quite grim reading, this report, Simon, and I hope you got my email, because I primed that I was going to ask you a question around this. And you obviously mentioned the reserves in your sort of introduction there, and obviously paragraph 1.1c refers to general reserves of sort of 10,933 in there, and then Appendix 1 goes on to outline the reserves in further detail. So I'm just trying to establish what is the total level of reserves available to the council, and is that 10 million or so? Is that the amount that's allocated and hence available to meet the budget shortfalls? Because then I think there was a link in the comments where Councillor Rawson referred to the reserves being 2.15 million. I don't know if that's total or whether that includes allocated reserves as well. So that would be quite interesting just to work out that reserve level, because as you mentioned in your introduction there, paragraph 11.11a, that refers to a current forecast overspend of around sort of just over £8 million, which I presume, as with the last municipal year's budget, that will come out of reserve. So if this is the overspend, what will be the revised level of reserves after this amount is deducted? So it's just really the exposure of the council, which you mentioned, Simon, in your introduction, to the level of reserves and that risk to the council. And also sections 410.11 to 410.13, they outline a significant potential budget gap to the council. So how will all of this impact on the general liquidity of the council and the council's ability to remain solvent and have sufficient reserves? And is this something that we should be worried about? And obviously in my role as chair of audit and accounts, I'm just concerned, I would like to gain assurance that how you're managing this sort of particular situation. And just one final comment, Chair, on or question really, or comment more really, on the matter of internal audit, which I just want clarified, is section 4232. That indicates that internal audit are forecasting an outturned overspend of a sort of 0.022 million, and that's as a result of a contribution to the Central Midlands Audit Partnership, who of course are the people that run there's a shared body that run the internal audit between us and a number of other councils, and it's to address their budget shortfall. However, in my position as part of the CMAT board, in that role of chair of audit and accounts, I'm aware, I think, from looking at the accounts, that CMAT still has significant reserves. So hence, why should the council be contributing to a shortfall. So I would suggest that needs further investigation and aligned with CMAT to ensure that the council is, I know it's a very small amount in the overall scheme of things, of course, but it's just to ensure that the council is utilising all finance, or available finance, in the best possible way. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen.
So, should I respond to that, Councillor Repton?
Would it be best to hear all the comments first and then respond? Which would you prefer, Simon?
I think because Councillor Willoughby's raised about 5 different queries, so that we may lose them if we add to.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
So, Councillor Willoughby has quite rightly mentioned the level of reserves, and I suppose I just want to explain to members how we assess the adequacy of reserves. So, in the budget report that all councils receive in February, I produced a Section 25 report about the adequacy of reserves and robustness of estimates. And in there were 2 very specific assessments of the level of the general fund balance, which is just over 10 million that Councillor Willoughby mentions, and the budget risk reserve that we use to smooth some of the pressures on the medium-term financial plan. And in there, I give ranges about what I think are reasonable, and our general fund balance was above that reasonable level, and the budget risk reserve for the known factors, and we've got to remember we set this budget before COVID, was viewed to be adequate for our medium-term financial strategy. So if we have the pressures and we cannot contain the additional demand, or COVID is not fully funded, then the council has to draw down on reserves going forward. So at the end of the last financial year, we had 10.9 million in our general fund balance and 13 million in our budget risk reserve, so about 24 million. So obviously the combined COVID shortfall and the budget position as reported at Q1 would take our reserves of those 2 reserves down to about the £10 million. And that would still be within the region of what I'd find acceptable at that point in time, but I would be stressing to council that levels of that reserve, when we potentially have impacts in future years, would leave us more vulnerable than, as your treasurer, I would like. But overall, so again, pick up Councillor Willoughby's point, we do have in all of our reserves, we have 84 million of earmark reserves, we have 66 million of capital reserves, and we have 47 million of the HRA. In total, we have 215 million of reserves, and they're stated in the statements of accounts if members are interested in the breakdown of that. And our liquidity is currently, we have over 90 million invested, securing a rate of return. So we are again liquid. So overall, I think the context is that if a government does not provide additional money, then we're going to have to cut our cloth to deliver the legal requirement of a balanced budget. It's not necessarily the immediate problem in this year, but for I think every local authority in the country, trying to set a budget against the unknown volatility for the next 3 to 5 years is going to be very difficult. And we have a duty to the council taxpayers of Derby to try and present a budget that delivers on our priorities within the resources available. And as I think you were implying, Councillor Willoughby, we cannot just keep on drawing on reserves, as our level of reserves at the end of this year would have moved from where we hoped it was going to be in February. And finally, in respect of the CMAP partnership, I think Councillor Willoughby, being on the CMAP Operational Board, will remember that the costs of the CMAP contribution have gone up for every council, and we set our budget before that meeting happened, but they are also drawing down on reserves to fund some of their activity. And the medium-term financial gap, which we highlight in 4.10 at the end, is an indication of a challenge that we face. But as the portfolio holder has said, we are looking at that in terms of how we address that through a variety of approaches which are detailed in the report, as well as lobbying. And out of all the figures in the report, I'd expect that to change over the next 2 quarters as we go through the budget process and seek further government funding or guidance. So it is a very complex year, but we are managing as much, and I'm managing as your Chief Finance Officer, the balance between all of this as best as we can. And again, I'll say again that our net position of the impact of the budget hit, COVID, and medium-term financial plan is not severe as many of our neighbouring councils.
Thank you, Simon. I think, Stephen, if you've got a very quick follow-on, because there are other people who wish to come in. Very quick one, please, Stephen.
Yes, thanks, Jay. You obviously mentioned about we can't keep drawing on reserves, so we can't keep doing this indefinitely because they'll eventually go down. I mean, what are you planning to do to try and, you know, stock those up again? And I sort of wrote, I think just for the cabinet member, I've written to you. I don't know if you got my email. I was suggesting that we met and went through this in more detail with me and my role as chair of audit and accounts, particularly how you're sort of what's been done to sort of in detail to manage the situation. So I presume I can ask some sort of PA to set a meeting up then, and we can go through that in more detail. But thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got Lucy to come in. Lucy.
Thank you. Can I start by saying paragraphs 4.2.13 and 14, I think they are a really good reflection on department coming in and saying, look, we've got a major problem and we're going to do something about it. So I really appreciate that response to what is a fairly gloomy situation that you've painted, Mr. Riley. But that's looking at the foster care recruitment, it's looking at how we are working with Derby Homes and all that sort of combined thing, which we've been talking about for years. But it seems to be, thankfully, beginning to bring some dividends. So I think that's been a really positive approach. And I think it also may show that we have the creativity within the council to hopefully deliver those sorts of changes in other areas that aren't currently as pressing. But with that sort of activity, we may be able to achieve savings in that will help our broader budgets. So all power to everyone's elbow on that. I've got 4 questions which all relate to 4.2, no, 2 of them are to 4.2 and 2 are 4.4 paragraphs. Firstly, 4.2.25 says that the level of recycling across the city has gone up, which is clearly good news. Maybe people have had more time, or maybe they've had less space in their black bins, but whatever the reason is, I think that's a really good positive thing. I've also had pointed out that we now are recycling aluminium foil and aluminium food trays, and people may not be aware of that as it's quite a local change. So I think while we're on a winning streak, I think we ought to be promoting that to people more widely. And doing more of it. So I just wanted to check whether we were actually doing more recycling and not just less black bins. Do you know if that's the case?
We can get the waste volumes from our Street Pride colleagues and provide that context to Councillor Kerr.
Okay. Thank you. That's number 1. Number 2, Lucy.
Number 2 is for 4.2.36, which isn't such good news, which is that our hydro plant was flood damaged, and it doesn't say whether it's actually now been repaired or whether we've actually got an increase in our electricity costs as well as a reduction in our feed-in tariffs. And I was wondering if you had an update on that.
Simon?
In order to make some of the claims on that, we've been in discussion with both the funders and I think the bank as well in terms of the feed-in tariff and everything else. So we have been exploring mitigating some of that loss through negotiation with other partners, but I can't remember the exact details here. But again, I can get back to you, Councillor Kerr.
So is the plant currently working or not?
I believe the plant is working, and this was an event in the past.
Okay, that's good. And then under 4.4, 4.423 is saying there's been a delay in the delivery of the LED street lighting investment, and that was expecting to have that resolved by the end of August. and I'm wondering whether that was resolved by the end of August, and we're now going to be going through and getting some benefit before next winter, when obviously we have more street lights operating for longer during the winter.
Okay, Simon?
There was a delay in getting the settlement agreed through the Balfour Beatty sort of a governance process. It's now been settled, and part of that was also linking into the future investment plans that we talked about 3 to 4 months ago around the LED investment. I will again ask Dave Kinsey and his team to provide an update to Councillor Kerr on that.
Thank you. And finally, 4.4.48 talks about digital by default. And I think we've seen how quickly people can be encouraged to do more stuff digitally. A year ago, 6 months ago, we weren't even having meetings digitally. And I think the same is true for a significant proportion of the population. But I think there are still people who need their hands holding a bit to be able to pay digitally. I still know of people who are paying, wanting to pay in cash for things like their council tax. And I think there is more work to be done on accessing our website and those sorts of things. So as well as the technology updates that team is continuing to work on, I wonder whether there's been any discussion about more softer skills development within the wider population to make sure that people who are maybe phoning up and wanting to get a telephone service can actually be encouraged to find out if they've got the technology at home and somebody can handhold them through using online facilities more, or whether we're not yet doing that soft confidence building.
Yeah, we are. Thank you. And Councillor Kerr raises the very important point. We were discussing it, that our digital agenda is not seeking to exclude those who are not as digitally knowledgeable or digitally enabled, but maximising the benefit of those who have that technology, and COVID maybe has encouraged them to access information electronically, whereas previously they'd have walked into the council house. Looking at this, I think we are looking at the front doors that we have into the council, how people access the service, and how we can, to use the health term, triage them to make sure that they get the right support from the right area. So we've been developing the voluntary sector and independent sector money advice services. We've got multi-agency arrangements in respect of safeguarding and MASH and everything else. And again, the role of Derby Direct and the hub that we talked about during COVID. All of this is, in a sense, using the learning from COVID to make sure that the model of how people engage with the council doesn't go back to where it was, but we're actually walking alongside people to encourage them to hopefully get a better response first time, which is important, but also to cut down inevitably those areas of failure management that we have in terms of repeat visits, but also maybe the cost of giving information electronically, or people being able to pay electronically could be tenfold cheaper than people coming into the council house. And we need to look at that, because there's a win-win for the residents and business and for the council there. So yes, all your points are very much on our digital by default agenda.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fareed, did you want to come over the question?
Yes, mate, yeah.
Okay.
Just a quick observation. I think back in February, when we were discussing budget, I did raise the question of the spend, which was capped at not last year's level, but there was an overspend the year before. And I did ask the question why that wasn't being put in the base budget, because the chances of us achieving a reduction in children's budget would be quite minimal. I think this is, Simon, the answer you gave was the projections were that the number of children who are in care is expected to come down, which hasn't happened. And I think that's part of the difficulty, because we didn't put enough money in that particular service in the first place, because we were perhaps over optimistic in terms of future demand. Having worked in social services for nearly 30 years, both adult services and childcare, I can say the chances of us achieving any savings in those two areas in the next 2 or 3 years look very minimal. So if you are drawing up new plans to contain the spend, please don't be over optimistic or too hopeful that you'll be able to do that, because the demand is rising across board throughout the country. Us being able to do something differently in Derby would probably not happen. The reason I'm raising this point is so we can focus on other areas where there's a reasonable chance of us being able to save some money to make the budget balance for the next year and the year after. Because obviously there's no harm us trying to bring the spend down in health and adult care services and also children's services. But practically, the chances are very minimal that we'll be able to do it.
Thank you, and I'll bring in Andy Smith in a minute. But when we set the budgets, obviously we have to work on the knowledge we have primarily around December of each year as we go out to consultation. And around that time, we recognised that we had last year's overspend on children's social care, probably to the tune of about £7 million. We built 5 million into the budget, and we had a series of interventions, which some are mentioned in the report, that we thought was going to manage some of that demand pressure. As I said in the beginning, we have had a perfect storm of COVID, increased demand, children maybe being in the looked after children system longer than we would hope for, and also, as I think it's been well rehearsed in this arena, that back in the early part of the decade, we lost a lot of in-city provision in terms of foster care and other in-city sufficiency, that with the increase in demand, we're now, in a sense, having to place children out of the city. Independent foster care is about £800 a week, and a residential placement could be between £5,000 and £8,000 a week. So it's not that we are trying to sort of not acknowledge the demand, but I think Councillor is saying we've got to acknowledge that probably the demand in this year has been quite atypical in terms of what we would have expected when we were setting the budget back in February. We did factor some into the budget, but the demand has exceeded that, hence the overspend in this financial year. But I'll ask Andy Smith to come in maybe to give a bit more of a professional view about the demand profiles in social care.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and Councillor Hussain, thanks for your kind of question really, and your challenge. And I think you raise a really wicked issue that I think every council and DCS and DAS in the land are trying to grapple with in relation to how do we appropriately and safely manage demand in children's services, and we'll talk about children's because that's where we've got the particular challenge in Derby, whilst also ensuring that we are looking after the right children for the right amount of time, and that we're doing everything we can to try and support families to remain together and not bring children into the care system, and then for kids not to be in the care system for any longer than necessary. And all these things we're continually trying to balance. I think when the budget was set through the consultation back in the latter part of the last municipal year, we factored in over 3 years a £7 million growth into children's services over 3 years, and 2 million of that was around or for agency placements, and that was based on the fact that at that time we had about just over 2 million overspend on agency placements. Our looked after children numbers were stabilising at that point. We were in about the 560s, 570s, and some of the work that's outlined in 4214, which started in the last municipal year, so the things that Lucy referred to earlier, the corporate approach to fostering recruitment, the corporate demand management board, that was beginning to have some impact. So we felt that was a kind of reasonable position to take. I mean, there were other things as well that we looked at as the budget around SEND and social work caseloads, but the biggest pressure was and often is around looked after children placements. What then happened is in Q4, really leading up to COVID, but not necessarily linked to COVID, is that we had a some challenges in 2 of our children's homes, which meant that we had to temporarily close 2 homes, and that created an immediate pressure. And we saw an increase in LAC numbers in Q4, so really January through to March of the last financial year, and that did impact on our bottom line in terms of the budget from last year, which you received a report on the last scrutiny meeting that went to Cabinet. I think that the COVID context we're in now is even more challenging in many ways, which is outlined in the report. And just really briefly, I guess that, you know, where we are is that prior to COVID, we had a care market or a care system that was pretty much broken anyway. And that's why, you know, the DfE are going to undertake a care review. They need to be looking at the way in which care placements are developed, the whole argument around there not being sufficient placements, and the impact that has on all councils, because we're increasingly paying a lot more for placements, and we're seeing that increase significantly during the pandemic, and that's been compounded as well during the pandemic by some of the requirements, quite rightly, for us not to be moving children from one placement to another, a request within government guidance that children should stay in placements and not leave care. So we've got an increased number of children staying put post 18, and all of that means that we've got children staying in the care system longer. So our LAC numbers are currently today 645. At the point of the budget being agreed, they're about 570. So they've really gone up since the pandemic started, and some of that is about new entrants into care because of demand, but some of that's about children staying in care longer, which is why the work that's outlined in 4214 is really important, whilst also through my professional association, the ADCS, Association of Directors of Children's Services, we are, through the comprehensive spending review that's around the corner, putting forward, you know, robust evidence around the financial gap that councils are predicting, which was significant prior to COVID, but even more so now, and also the fact that the DfE need to start the care review and need to start to deal with some of these challenges that have become even more pronounced and highlighted during the pandemic.
Thank you, Andy. Lucy, I think you wanted to follow up on Andy's points.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I think could be a problem at the moment is people who have the capacity to have a foster child are being told that they can't have anybody else in their household. We've still got these COVID type restrictions that you are your household and you haven't got extra people in. I think that may be a barrier to people. So if we haven't got a frequently asked question that is addressing the ability for someone to increase the size of their household with a looked after child, can we make sure that we've got something up there? I'm sorry, I haven't checked our website. But if not, I think that is the sort of barrier that we need to overcome.
I mean, just come back briefly on that, Chair. And we certainly had some carers, some foster carers that have shielded. So they might have a place, they might have a spare bed, and they might be approved to take an additional child or children, but we've not been able to place any new children with them because of the shielding guidance. And that has clearly, you know, evolved and come to an end now and has moved on. So that's clearly something that's dynamic and changing all the time. What's positive, and what's not in the report, but what is positive is that we are still getting a lot of interest from families and from single people across Derby and Derbyshire that want to foster for Derby City Council. We had our first virtual recruitment event about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had something like 50 people come to that virtually, good. Which is tremendous. So we are still working as dynamically as we can to recruit and also trying to take some of the advantages really of the COVID context we're in. It might mean that people are thinking about doing something different or a career choice, and we're trying to take advantage of that as well in terms of how we are recruiting and trying to identify potential foster carers. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Now, I know that Nick wants to come in, but I want to put the recommendations to the executive scrutiny. We've got 2 recommendations. The first one is that Cabinet need to urgently explain how the multi-million-pound budget black hole will be met, and that's the £10 to £20 million as estimated by senior officers. Is it by a 15% increase in council tax, cuts to threadbare statutory services, or a massive government increase in the city's base budget, or all 3? Now, are we quite happy with that in terms of going, so we can have that public debate? Because I think the public will be keen to have some answers to that.
Chair, can I just come in? Sorry, Chair. Can I just come in, Chair? I think one thing you've missed from that is about the reserves.
Okay,
the reserve situation.
Okay, do you want to add something to that? I'd be quite happy to contain that, Stephen.
Yeah, I suppose it could be, and it would be all full, or the city's. I suppose it would be after a massive increase in the city's base budget, or will you just continue to draw down from reserves? I suppose indefinitely, you know.
To draw down from reserves, or a mixture of all three.
Yes,
all four.
Yes. Yes.
Stephen, are you okay to incorporate that for us, or do you need Stephen or Lucy to add that?
No, that's fine. I think we just need to get this a little clearer here. So we've got the three options. Is it by a 15% increase in council tax, cuts to threadbare statutory services, or a massive government increase, etc., etc.? And Councillor Willoughby is proposing a fourth one.
So cuts to threadbare statutory services, a use of our reserves, or a massive government increase, or all four.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that amendment. Yeah.
Chair, can I just comment here? For recommendation.
Simon, it is a recommendation from elected members. Please.
Yeah, I'm not commenting on what is being said. I just want to give the context that currently under the referendum criteria, we're not allowed to set, or we have not been allowed to set a 15% increase previously without a referendum. The report does detail that we're looking at all the options here, and that we'll be bringing the MTFP paper in sort of December with these strands within it. So I suppose as your treasurer, I'm just trying to understand that if Cabinet was to approve this, are you asking for a special meeting to consider it? Because the MTFP is scheduled to come in December to say how we will set a balanced budget after the comprehensive spending review. So I'm just trying to work out, Chair, how this would, if approved by Cabinet, what the executive scrutiny wants.
Well, Chair, can I just come in? It's Miles.
Yeah.
Just on your on the recommendation.
Miles, I'll let you come in a second. I just want to make a comment back to Simon, then I'll bring you in. As I've done other people, you can indicate when you wish to speak, Miles. Then I'll take you in due course to the people. In terms of what you said, Simon, I think it's right for this committee to ask that question. It's up to you and the Cabinet to actually consider how you wish to respond. But obviously, we believe that the public need to be, to be informed as soon as possible, and so we're quite happy to give you the leeway to consider that and then respond to it tomorrow evening. Right, okay, Miles, you wanted to come in.
Martin, I think I was next, if you remember. I just
sorry, Nicola, and then Miles. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I just wanted to emphasise that I have actually responded to that, Martin. I've explained that it will potentially be a combination of all. I think in reality, the MTFP is just what you're asking for, and it is being worked on. The capital budget, the capital plan is being reviewed, budgets are being reviewed, even the reserves in general, the general reserves are being reviewed as part of this action. So I understand to a certain degree your recommendation, but I think you, as you've said, this is actually a public meeting. You've had a response from the Cabinet member on this. By all means, if you want to pass it through as a recommendation, all I can say is you'll be given the same answer.
Well, with all due respect, as elected members, that's what we do want. We want it to. It's of such importance to the city and the people in the city.
Absolutely, but there needs to be a vote of all the elected members, Martin.
If I can finish, please, Nicola. I think we need to have a proper debate at Cabinet. And I think you've given us a general outline, all three, but we need more specifics on it. So the recommendation is, I'll take the recommendation now. Is anybody that objects to...
I still wanted to speak.
Yes.
Miles.
Just on the recommendation that obviously you're listing three, quite specific points. And I think by doing that, you're actually just hindering the answers that you're looking for, given that there is no one answer, or you've listed those specific points. I personally think you'd be better out taking out those specific points and trying to get a broader answer from Cabinet and what their response may be.
Well, okay, that's your opinion, but I'm still.
There is no one answer.
I still intend to put it as a recommendation, then it's up to people to vote for it or not vote for it. Any more comments before we go to recommendation? Anybody who is against that, can you indicate, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to vote against it.
I'll vote against it.
Okay. Otherwise,
Chair, in that case, I'll just go through a quick vote.
Yeah, sure.
On that, I'm going to read through it again, Chair. Resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that it needs to urgently explain how the multi-million-pound budget black hole will be met. Is it by a 50% increase in council tax, cuts to threadbare statutory services, use of our reserves, or a massive government increase in the city's base budget, or all four? And if I just go through the members, Chair, alphabetically, Councillor Kerr, please.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Evans, please.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
Against.
Councillor Hussain.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Pegg.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Testro.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Willoughby, please.
I will abstain as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, yourself, Chair.
For.
So that's 3 for and 4 against and 2 abstentions.
Right,
so that's
okay.
4 against.
Okay, there's still questions that need to be asked. It's a shame that elected members couldn't support that, but let's move on to the next recommendation. Do you want to read that out, Stephen? That's from Lucy, 2 from Lucy.
Yes, I have that here, Chair. So, if I may, resolve to recommend to Council Cabinet that if lower waste levels mentioned in 4.2.25 reflects higher recycling performance, and noting the recent addition of aluminium foil and food trays to the blue bin collections, the Council uses these to encourage further recycling by citizens across the city.
Right, okay. Any objections to that?
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Lucy.
Anybody object? No? Okay. Well, I think that's passed then, unless there are any objections. And what's the next one? And Stephen, do you want to read that?
Okay, so, excuse me, Chair. So at item 12 is to consider a resolution to exclude the present public during consideration of the following item, that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves a likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so shall we enact that? What happens now then, Stephen?
Is that all agreed? My colleague, Chair, will indicate when the live broadcast has ended, and then there's just one final thing I need to do before we then proceed to item 13.